On the 4th of September 1985, a British firefighter stood in the smoking ruin of a semi-detached house in Yorkshire and noticed something that made his skin crawl. Everything in that room was ash: the sofa, the carpet, the wallpaper, except for one thing hanging crooked on the wall: a painting of a crying little boy, completely untouched. I'm Percy Winslow, and normally this is where I'd make some joke about my own flammable curiosity. But let's just sit with that image for a second. A house reduced to cinders, and one painting of a sobbing child staring out from the wreckage like nothing happened. That's the kind of detail that gets tabloids salivating and homeowners reaching for the fire extinguisher. The painting in question was mass-produced, printed by the thousands, sold in department stores across Britain for a few quid a pop, the kind of thing you'd find above a mantelpiece in half the houses on your street. It's attributed to an Italian artist known as Bruno Amadio, though known is generous. Details about the man are so thin, you'd think he printed himself out of mist. Some records suggest he also worked under the name Giovanni Bragolin. Nobody's entirely sure which name is real. The image itself is simple: a doe-eyed boy, tears streaming down his face, rendered in that soft, sentimental style that was enormously popular in mass-market prints throughout the 60s and 70s. Harmless, technically. Sad, sure. The kind of thing you buy because it matches the drapes, not because you think it's cursed. Then the Sun ran its story. On September 4th, 1985, the paper published an article claiming that fire crews across England kept finding the same picture, or one just like it, sitting completely undamaged in homes gutted by fire. Not scorched, not smoke-stained, untouched, like the flames had simply declined to bother with it. The story spread the way these things do: fast, and with very little interest in the details. Within weeks, the Sun claimed to have received reports of over 50 fires connected to the painting. Neighbors started whispering about that house down the road that burned to the studs. Insurance adjusters started hearing the same story on repeat from families who swore the crying boy was the only thing left standing. And here's where I'd love to tell you there's a tidy explanation, and we can all go home. But where's the fun in that? The panic escalated to the point where people were dragging the paintings out of their homes and refusing to even throw them in the bin, terrified that destroying it might unleash something worse. So on the 31st of October, 1985, Halloween, because tabloids do love their theater, the Sun organized a mass bonfire. Thousands of readers mailed in their prints, and the paper torched them in a public bonfire, presumably while somebody stood well back with a fire extinguisher, just in case irony has a sense of humor. Now, skeptics have had their say, and it's worth hearing them out before we get too comfortable being spooked. Fire investigators pointed out that the prints were coated in a fire-resistant varnish as part of the mass production process, meaning they'd genuinely be more heat-resistant than the wooden frames and paper wallpaper around them. There's also a much simpler physics explanation. The boards the prints were printed on could be denser and harder to ignite than the flammable furniture nearby, so in a fast-moving house fire, they'd sometimes survive when softer materials didn't. That's a perfectly reasonable, boring explanation, and I want you to hold on to it, because it doesn't explain everything. It doesn't explain why house after house reported the exact same painting, undamaged, in wildly different fire conditions, different builders, different neighborhoods. It doesn't explain why some fire officers, professionals, who'd seen plenty of house fires and knew what usually survives, said this pattern struck them as genuinely unusual. There's also the matter of the artist himself, and this is the part I find properly unsettling. Rumors circulated for years that the boy in the painting was a real child, an orphan Amadio used as a model, and that shortly after the painting was completed, tragedy followed the boy. Some versions say a fire, some say something worse. There's no solid documentation to confirm any of this. Amadio himself is a ghost in the historical record. Vague biography, conflicting details, no clear grave, no clear answers. What we do know is that this wasn't some obscure folk legend passed down over centuries. This was 1985. Color television, Duran Duran, and apparently several thousand British households convinced a department store painting was setting their homes on fire. The bonfire happened, the prints burned, and you'd think that would be the end of it. Tidy little ending, evil painting vanquished by tabloid theatre. Except copies of The Crying Boy are still out there, in charity shops, attics, the back of wardrobes nobody's opened in years. And every so often, somebody posts online that they just found one in their late grandmother's house, and they're not entirely sure what to do with it. I'll tell you what I did. Absolutely nothing, because I like my flat, and I like having a flat that isn't ash. Make of that what you will.